Welcome to another episode. Today I am joined by the Biconomy team. Mislav has already featured on the podcast, but this is Ahmed's first time, so thanks a lot for joining me and welcome.
Hi,
Thanks.
everyone.
Hey everyone, thanks a lot for having us, Arjun.
Awesome. Why don't we start with really quick intros before we get deeper into the Biconomy network launch?
Awesome. Yeah, happy to go first. So my name's Ahmed. I'm one of the co-founders at Biconomy. Been in the space for the past, I'd say, wow, it's been like 7 or 8 years. Now I'm thinking about it. So it's been, say, nearly a lifetime. Yeah.
Yeah, on my side, Mislav here. I'm VP of product here at Biconomy. A lot of things on the Biconomy network were kind of a joint effort where we joined Biconomy with like a very good R&D idea built on top of like their existing battle-tested stack, and then like merged it all together. So that's how because the last time I was here, I was in a capacity of another company, and that company is now fully part of Biconomy, merged into it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been like an interesting story. Like Mislav, you were building this whole chain abstraction toolkit, and now all of that has come together. And recently, you guys launched the Biconomy network. Right? So just so that people know what the network is, what are the different pieces that come in together, why don't we start with like what is the Biconomy network?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Biconomy network essentially came about as a realization that the application layer of blockchains today is severely limited. Like in comparison to any type of Web2 stack, anything you can do, it's extremely limited as a developer. You basically encode a transaction. There's one transaction call that gets executed immediately, and that's it. Those are your options, basically. Sometimes with ERC-4337, you could like batch execute a few function calls, which was much better, and it got like gasless stuff working. But that was about it. And we came to a realization that this is not going to suffice for modern applications. And this is not only in a multi-chain context, even in a single-chain context. If you wanted to build any type of meaningful application that combines multiple applications, so maybe you want to go to Aave and Uniswap and Morpho and some others together, basically you end up needing to write smart contracts, which you have to audit, which you have to do a bunch of things. And so Biconomy network in its essence is a layer sitting on top of blockchains. You can think of it as an application layer, like together with the RPCs and all of these associated things. It's sitting there, and it enables the developer to encode multiple composable transaction calls, which means basically swap something on Uniswap, then take the exact output of that swap, put it, call like Li.F to bridge it to another chain. Then once it arrives, the exact amount that arrived, swap it, open an LP position, do something else, Combine all of this into this object that we call the super transaction. Once this is done, basically the network orchestrates everything for you. But why is it a network? Because it's really a trustless environment where you get a cryptographic commitment from executing nodes who get slashed if they don't execute your operations in the correct order. So it's basically decentralized, trustless peer-to-peer network, but it's not like blockchain. It's not including transactions. It's just orchestrating function calls across one or more blockchains.
Yeah. So just to like on that last point, the network itself is not a blockchain. It's not an L2. It's not an L1. It's mainly a network of peer-to-peer nodes. Orchestrating these transactions. So that's like one thing that we realized one or two people kind of got confused. They thought we launched a chain, but we didn't.
Makes sense. So I think like in the docs and also like the light paper that you guys like announced, you described it as an interop aggregator, right? Like it kind of combines a lot of the different layers of interop. Like let's say at the bottom there's like messaging, on top there are liquidity bridges, and then the Biconomy network kind of sits on top as this orchestration layer that app developers would directly interact with, right? Like is that the correct framing?
So in a sense, yes, but I would say that taking from some others, the developers would still be fully able to encode their own actions as normal call data. So basically, it's not as if it's this like extreme abstraction layer that just tells you, it's the Biconomy way or the highway. You still use your normal SDKs, use VM, use the whatever you're using now to prepare your call data. It will all keep on working. The only difference now is that you can bundle multiple transactions into a single signature, have them orchestrated. There is an ability to execute them asynchronously. So maybe you're triggering a bridge, and then the next transaction doesn't have to happen immediately. It has to wait for the bridge to complete. So you used to not have that. It's as basic as that how limited the environment for blockchains was. Just waiting for something to happen and then something else happening is like the most common pattern in web development today across all industries. And so, these types of patterns now become possible. Composing the output of one transaction into the next one, waiting asynchronously, but then let's call it, if you're calling a bridge, like you're interacting with a bridge, you interact with it the exact same way as if you interacted before. So it's you call the exact same call data, exact same libraries, SDKs. It's just like your, call it RPCs or whatever, like your interface to the blockchain becomes much more powerful.
Got it. And then, so like one of the mental models for developers to build in crypto has always been chain specific, right? Like whenever we look at an app, the first question is like, okay, which chain is it on? But then if a developer directly builds on top of Biconomy network, they can basically use a chain simply for execution, right? So there's a different mental model that you're advocating in a way that you don't need to be building in a chain specific environment. So what sort of like mental model are you advocating towards for developers? Like how do you want them to think about the ecosystem so that they can make the most of your tech today?
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I can answer this one as well. So it's the model we're advocating is not chain abstraction, and I know that that's a lot of people think that it is. We are supporting fully chain abstraction. Like if a developer wants to build a chain abstracted app, even some of our demos are fully chain abstracted. We support it. We encourage developers to do it. But what we have found is that there is no one size fits all type of application for blockchains. Some applications really want to be chain specific. They want you to know that they are on this specific chain because of like commercial relationships, or because that chain is trusted, or there's compliance reasons. There's a million reasons why an application would want to be explicit about the chain that they're on. So the Biconomy network is still here a very, very useful tool for massively improving the UX and developer experience for that application, because they can now, instead of writing smart contracts, they can write these scripts that interact with all the deployed protocols on that application. But yes, you're right. If an application developer doesn't want to think about the blockchains, they just want to think about the fact that a user has USDC somewhere and I need it on this other place, I can just get it from the user. The network will basically orchestrate it. And just to be clear on this, the network doesn't choose the bridge for you. Like our SDK can choose the bridge for you. We built utility functions. We have APIs which can help you out on like, okay, you want to interact with this, interact with that. But the network itself is just orchestrating whatever call data it gets. And that's the beauty of it, basically. You don't have to update your mental model as much. You can basically keep on working the way you were working, but just then get all these benefits if and when you want them. So that would be my take, maybe, that we're not even trying to like change the mental model as much as it might have come across from the light paper and stuff.
I think that makes sense, because like whenever I used to think about Biconomy, I was like, okay, I can just interact with this toolkit and I can just interact with and build on different chains, right? But it makes sense. Like you don't need to be multi-chain. You can still be live on a single chain, but then use all of the different features that you guys have built to build a better application.
Yeah,
exactly.
I would also add as well, like because when you ask a question about like updating mental models, the thing is that to get developers to think about new mental models, I would say is always going to be harder than actually building the tech, right? And so it's about how can we expand what developers are doing today and just really make it easier. And so that's been, I would say, like our like guiding light in terms of, all right, this is how developers work, this is what they do, and so how can we just make it way simpler than it is today. And one other thing I want to add as well is the way we like to think about it is that like when you sort of think about and talk about chain abstraction, for us, like the chain abstraction part is just more, it's a feature. It's not the thing which we're trying to say, hey, like all apps have to be chain abstracted. It's more of a case of, if a developer wants to enable more chain abstraction than another app, depending on what their app is, then that's great. This is something that that they can do. So it's not, it's definitely not like updating the mental model. It's keeping the same, and it can be expanded.
I'd even add maybe just one more thing on top of that, is that we're actually also now doing the work of educating our developers that Biconomy has changed. Biconomy used to represent this thing where you had to deposit to a smart account, and then you would do all of these things. Our entire stack now works with EOAs. There's no need for you to like deposit to the smart account. There is a smart account that's being used in the background, but like it's all abstracted away from our developers. They can simply like, okay, you have a developer you have a user who has all their money on an EOA, and you want to create this like multi-chain orchestration flow with a single signature. It works. It just works, like fully backwards compatible, even with pre-7702. Like we're not even, there isn't even a requirement for that. We support it, and some of our flows are going to get much nicer after 7702. But like basically everything we do can just be used right now immediately by basically any EVM developer, just like plug and play.
I think that makes sense, and it's an important clarification because earlier you guys did a lot of work with account abstraction, right? So maybe that's where the
Yeah.
mental model for everyone comes in the picture. But that makes
Yeah.
sense. Like it's a good thing because you have so much experience building with account abstraction, so it's nice, and you can now, of course, use it with EOAs. Like
Yes.
when you were answering that question, I was thinking about like as infra developers, do you think you should be opinionated in the way app builders kind of use your infrastructure? Like let's say I don't know. Do you advise people on what chains to execute on, or like what sort of like tooling to use inside Biconomy? Like, how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, no, this is a really interesting question because it's, we've had this like discussion multiple times where it's like, oh, this part looks maybe a bit too opinionated. Oh, this part is customizable. But wait a minute, like if it's customizable, it could be a bit too general, and therefore, it would mean that we're asking too much from developers, right? That they would have to create specific things. So what we're realizing, like for example, there are like specific like DeFi flows, that developers are wanting or kind of expect out of the box, but we thought they would just like to build it themselves. And so this is like one key learning where maybe us being opinionated there might make sense and might help. And there are of course there are always going to be core parts to the network where it's going to be opinionated. At the SDK level, that's where we could iterate a lot, where either we enable more customizability or like actually be opinionated to a specific flow. So we're actually still like learning what should be opinionated and what shouldn't, because that is that I would say like that is a huge part to like what we're building, especially like everything is open source. We like that's our ethos, even with the smart account and the ERC 7579 implementation. Like the whole point of that was that we're unopinionated. So I'd say we started off with being very unopinionated and deciding where we should be opinionated depending on the stack.
So yeah, that's exactly what Ahmed said. It's always a tricky thing when building out the SDK. I mean, the protocol level itself is completely unopinionated. It really doesn't enforce any flows, but everyone interacts mostly through the SDK. And then the thing is, we do have now like a few flows which are very opinionated in a sense where it's, okay, you want to support multi-chain, multi-instruction, gasless execution for EOAs, right? You have to be opinionated there because there's only one way to do it. There's not like 15 ways to achieve that functionality. So we have that flow like fully abstracted in the SDK. We call it Fusion Execution. And you have this function called execute Fusion transaction, and it does everything. It basically what it does is it like transfers from your EOA to the smart account, then processes everything, and then returns everything back to the EOA. And there you have to put on these abstractions. But for some other flows, there is basically zero opinions, whereas basically every client has their own type of implementation, or like which bridge they're using, which DEX they're using, which aggregator, which call data provider. All of these things are basically plug and play. But for some of the flows, we just kind of make it very opinionated to make it simpler.
I mean, I think that makes sense because like there is never a right answer, right? Like if you do one thing, people would say like, why didn't you do this? So it's always better to just, like you said, start unopinionated, but then start building plugins that are sort of opinionated that developers actually want. But like interestingly, I feel like there's so much good infrastructure now to build really cool apps, but then we're still we're still not seeing like new applications, right? Like even in the interop ecosystem, there's so much infrastructure where you can build an app that can live on 50 chains, right? But developers are still building, let's say, a Uniswap clone on a new chain that pops up because that's just a quicker incentive cycle. Like you can spend a year, get traction, and then maybe get an exit. So how do you think like that cycle changes in crypto? Like we have cool infrastructure like Biconomy where you can build basically anything on different chains. How do we incentivize more development towards that instead of like building a vanilla DEX on the 1000 chain?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. So I would actually say I would actually say that clone on the 1000th chain, I would actually say people have to build it because the reason being is because and this is just feedback I'm hearing, right? Any chain that's coming out, it needs a DeFi ecosystem. So what does a DeFi ecosystem need? It needs liquidity, it needs DEXs, lending, all this stuff. So I used to kind of think, oh, like these clones may or may not be they might not be as useful, but it actually would help the chain so much more if there's an extremely liquid hub within the chain itself. what we're seeing, and you guys are probably seeing the same as well in general, like there are definitely these, like, there's more and more like super apps where a user could just come into um, and like this application, and they would see like maybe many different types of yield across these chains, or they could basically swap. I'd say like we're kind of seeing a lot more abstraction in terms of applications on that layer, and I would say like the perp stuff as well, right? Like if you look at, I'd say there are more people building perp exchanges than they are cloning dexes. Like, and maybe it's just because it's a bigger market, right? Um, and so to answer the other part of your question, how do we sort of incentivize? I mean, in general, I definitely do think we need we need like one awesome like success story just as an industry of, hey, look at this app, it's somewhat chain abstracted, and they've managed to be able to do this really cool thing. Um, and that would sort of course accelerate other like very similar apps to follow. But in general, the way I kind of look at it, and unfortunately we're still in the space where people love speculation, and so we're probably going to see applications that tend to say, okay, how can we make people speculate in an easier way, right? And that's just an unfortunate thing, but that's what we're kind of seeing being built, if that makes sense. So yeah, like we're honestly like more about like, okay, what are the use cases, what are the user flows that make sense? Because they could be within applications that exist today, or it could be the case of, hey, like there's a new app coming, and they're just solving one specific problem that we could help.
Yep.
Anything to add there, Mislav?
Well, from my point of view, I'm really bullish long term on this model of like there being a chain for every use case, like a swapping chain, a lending chain, these chains, but maybe not one, but like a few. Then others can tap into it. I think it's more of a question of technological maturity, which still isn't there. So, for example, if you look at like Optimism, native interop, they're working on these like 2-3 second times, delegations, and we're actually building some stacks on top of that, to enable our orchestration on top of native interop and all of it. So when this becomes ready, then this kicks off. And people can always be like very bearish on new models when they come early because they don't understand the technical complexity. So I'll point a parallel. When we started getting like cheap transactions 4 or 5 years ago, like people would be like extremely critical of like Polygon, that you're gonna lose your money, don't bridge there, don't do it, and then everything turned out fine, and people didn't lose their money. They did some on bridges mostly, but it was like overall it was all good, right? And initially all these experiences are bad, and then as we understand the model, the technology progresses. But this market has an extremely this not market industry has an extremely like low attention cycle. And then if something is not solved in like 3 or 6 months, they feel like this is never going to get solved. And then you have a team that sticks with it for like 2 or 3 years, and then suddenly ships something that's amazing. And yeah, it's like, imagine perp dexes, before these like last few months, years, it was even dexes themselves. I remember when I was going into blockchain, there was no dex at all. There was like Ether Delta or something. It was quite cumbersome. It was difficult to use. Then Uniswap came and changed everything, and suddenly blockchain was no longer just for ICOs. So I feel this model, like 3 to 5 years horizon, I think we're going to see this model live, which is like rollups with very specific purposes. Until then, I think we're going to be seeing these cloned apps on multiple chains just because of the lack of technological maturity, to be honest.
I mean, like both of you have good points, right? Because like Ahmed said, you actually need a DEX on any new chain. You need a DeFi ecosystem. But I think because there's like a limited pool of developers in crypto, like we need to kind of decide where to allocate resources. So because everyone is building that, nobody is thinking out of the box, and it does not happen overnight either, right? So somebody needs to be solving some sort of problem for like 2-3 years, and then something new might happen. Like Hyperliquid, for example, like technically it's still one of the applications that we've already seen in the market, right? Like it's still perps, but people appreciate the experience and like still enjoy that application. Like my question there would be, whenever we see a breakout application, these applications sort of want to own the stack, right? Like now there's this app chain logic. So even the chain part of the equation is also commoditized. So I feel like anytime there's a breakout application, they might want to use their own infrastructure, right? So do you think that could be a problem in adoption, or how do you see that?
This is a really good question, because there are times, like, I wouldn't blame you for thinking that, because there are times where I thought that as well. The thing is what we've realized and what we've seen, like I'll give an example, right? Everyone knows Privy. but no one knew them before Frentech,
Mhm.
right? Like Frentech was a breakout app. Everyone said, "Oh, what was used? Like, this was a cool experience. Who they're using was Privy." And I remember very clearly from there, it picked up a lot of really good steam. And so what I'm trying to say is that for infra breakouts, for example, once the messaging, once the value add is extremely clear, and if the incentives are aligned, why would a breakout app just like reinvent it? And so because I also remember speaking to apps that like, why would we maybe this was just old thinking, but they're like, oh, we're giving our users to Privy, so we'll just build it ourselves. And it's like that's not the right way to think about it. And so and I think incentives also matter a lot, because if you could supercharge a breakout app to grow even quicker, or to enable them to make even, let's say, create more value as well, um, instead of them having to do all that legwork, I think that's a very big value add that is pretty much overlooked, to be honest. So I'm not actually too worried about that. If if the infrastructure is actually really good, then why reinvent it?
I agree with Ahmed here, and I would just double down on one of the things he said, which is like these incentives. So a lot of this doesn't come down to technology; it just comes down to like commercial terms. And I remember, I'll always remember it. Like I had this one call a while back with a VC, and he told me like, if you want to make a protocol successful, you have to make sure that other people can make money from it. Like not you, but like you have to make sure that your customers make money because you exist. Right. And so then basically how you need to structure it, there needs to be some value leakage from your core protocol to the apps that are actually integrating it. There's nothing like concrete that we have now fully like pinpointed on, but like some good models are like what Sonic has been doing with the fee distribution, like what you guys, for example, have been doing with your integrators, where there's a rev share model. So I think there's a few of these models which kind of align the incentives, and then the integrator themselves, they don't have such an incentive to drop you, because they'd have to spend time on R&D, all of it, maintenance, everything, but they're still earning money from like using your stuff. So I think there's a good middle ground. If you are a purely extracted infra, like what a lot of chains were from for apps, then apps will abstract you away, because they're just leaking value to you. And so that's my take.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, because like the infrastructure is actually solving a big problem, right? Like you're helping them go to market much faster, and like there's a lot of work that goes into solving like onboarding flows, or how to make all of these things work together. So if things work perfectly, there is no incentive for them to try and reinvent the wheel. So I feel like
And
that.
it's not just that. If you think about it, this space moves extremely quickly. There are so many shifts happening beneath our feet, like all these new ERCs, EIPs, like to understand it, B to at least try it out, to demo it, to put it into production. All of this is work that would be like unknown unknowns for all of these app teams that shouldn't have to think about all this stuff, right? Whereas we're always on top of it. We make sure we're one of the first to be live and be in production. Like, for example, one of our devs just today on Slack was like, "Yep, I just got this thing working with the ERC 7710 and MetaMask delegation framework." And I don't see apps going out and doing this just because they just wouldn't have the time. They're not in that same sort of focus area that we're in as well. And so infrastructure like us and others, depending on where their focus is on, is that they would always keep up to date with all these, tech advancements at the protocol level, which are on point.
Like building on that, like, do you guys feel right now is perfect timing for an infrastructure like Biconomy to exist? Because it feels like the ecosystem is going through big changes, right? Like even in the Ethereum ecosystem, there are so many EIPs that are being accelerated because there's so much noise and like a push from users to see some sort of action.
Yeah.
There are so many new chains coming up, so it's almost like if a developer actually really just wants to build an application, they don't have time for all of this, right?
Yep.
Dude,
Well, please.
Yeah, just one thing, like one-click Ethereum, like that's what we're doing, right? Like one-click Ethereum is like what would even enable these new changes for us to just quickly accelerate, towards this vision. Because with, for example, 7702, with the Petra hard fork, and what we're planning and what we've already also just like put out into the market with our strategy as well, is that one-click Ethereum is possible. I would say even to some degree right now, but it would be better with 7702.
Yep, I agree with that. Like if you need like a left curve slogan for economy, it's like one click Ethereum. everything's got to be one click, and you never pay for gas ever again. At least not explicitly. You pay for it somehow. From the swap, it gets charged somewhere, but you don't see it. But I'd say like why now is we had this stack of EVM which came about in like 2014. And then it sort of stabilized by 2020, and you as a developer, and I know this dates me, because I already felt like I was a senior EVM developer in 2019 and 2020, but it was basically the idea you could count on a lot of things being stable and working in one way, and then everything got destroyed with the rollup roadmap. Basically, none of the assumptions worked the way they used to work before. And there was a lot of shifting. You didn't know who was going to win. Like, you didn't know there was going to be like optimism and arbitrum. And I think we all kind of forget how it used to be like just 2-3 years ago, right? There wasn't this like OP superchain or ZK sync elastic and whatever. And now what happened again, like what happened in 2017, 18 with the single chain Ethereum is now happening with the rollup ecosystem. Things are like settling down, You have solid foundations that you can make long-term decisions as an infra provider. How should we build this? And onto what Ahmed said, like with 7702, it's a standard that's been very controversial, but at least it's agreed and it's stable, and you can count on it existing in this format. And we've spoken to a lot of wallets, and now we know how wallets are going to approach it. These are all information that we didn't have a year ago. And if you don't have that information, it's very hard to build like a future-proof solution. And luckily now we have them. So if I would say why now is the moment, it's just this, like the ecosystem stabilized, around some things.
Yeah, I feel like even in the interop ecosystem, there's always so many things that are changing, right? Like there are so many unanswered questions and so many things that stay constant that you're always on your toes. Like you're always researching. There are standards coming out, new types of bridges, new primitives. Like if you think about it, intents as a concept did not exist like 2 years ago. Yeah. And today, every bridge that's coming out is an intent-based bridge. So things change very quickly. But how do you think the role of a chain is changing in this ecosystem now? Because if you think about Ethereum itself, like there are questions about like its utility or like place in the ecosystem. So if Ethereum is being questioned, think about all of the new chains that are coming up, right? How do you see the role of chains changing? Like earlier, I feel like they used to play a much bigger role because, I don't know, people just used to onboard to Ethereum and then think about crypto. But now there are different things, right? Like someone might just be onboarded to crypto through an application, right? So there is a changing dynamic. I feel like it'll accelerate even further where the app kind of comes out on top and the chain kind of sits down at the bottom.
I mean, this question reminds me of I think it was Hasib from Dragonfly, like how he in a way made an analogy that blockchains are like countries. Mm-hmm. And when you kind of think about that even today with everything that we've seen, I still think that kind of holds true to some degree because at the end of the day you're always kind of like looking at these separate entities as like their own zones or own countries or own borders, right? And you're always going to be questioning how they're doing, why is there more activity now, why is there less activity compared from today to before. And so I do think that we're in a better position to sort of, let's say, judge in at least a constructive way, right? How these zones or their own borders are actually doing. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like if it wasn't for the criticism that Ethereum got, then they wouldn't have done any of these changes. And so I still think that's like an interesting mental model just to think about, like, yeah, these are countries. It's the same. Like every time I come back to London, every other person's telling me I want to move to Dubai. Why would I go out of this country, right? So it's not that like and it just kind of reminds me of that sort of similar situation, like you're with this question that you're asking. So yes, that's at least how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, that's really good take from a philosophical perspective. Mine is maybe from a bit more technical perspective. Is I feel like Ethereum is evolving quite a lot towards like what the original idea of the Polkadot model was, so Polkadot has still a really good model, which basically the idea is that you want to own your own block space because you want like your block space to be customizable, and that I think ties nicely into this country analogy, because if every country was the same, then there'd be no reason to move from one to another. So like rollups, basically they just need to post data to Ethereum, but they can have EVM, they can be SVM, they can be fast, slow, parallel execution, whatever. You have this like broad space for experimentation on what's the best chain to, what's the best blockchain architecture. I don't think this is a set thing. We're very far from like deciding what the best blockchain architecture is. even if there maybe isn't one best blockchain architecture, you know. So I think of it now basically as this thing where it's Ethereum has just started being this sort of liquidity hub and a place to post your, you know, call data and this source of security for the rollup ecosystem that's being built around it. I'll be fully frank, like I use Ethereum again. I didn't use it for a while because now it's cheap again, and I guess it just like ties down to these like very primitive dynamics. If it's cheap enough, I use it. But yeah, I feel long term very bullish about the role of like experimental models in like new chains that appear, and them all settling down to the same layer, which can be used as especially like if Ethereum scales another 10 to 100x, which I think is quite viable in the future. That's gonna be enough for it to serve as like a central liquidity and messaging hub for all these like rollups that turn out around it. So I feel that that's the way how the relationship between rollups and Ethereum is starting to develop in the long term.
I mean, it makes sense. So, and I feel like the crypto ecosystem in general is also converging towards this idea of like interop-enabled zones in a way. Like Optimism has their own zone of like interop-enabled chains, and then if you think about Ethereum, that's also a similar zone. Cosmos is trying to do something. So everyone has the same idea. Do you guys think that's the end game? Because like everyone is thinking the same way after trying different approaches, but we're kind of converging at this point where everyone is like, okay, I don't know, Cosmos or Polkadot might be onto something, and maybe this is the best way to do it.
I think yes. So
Yeah.
it's short and sweet.
Yeah, no, it does make sense because if you think about like, you know, all these chains that well, I mean, Optimism, Arbitrum, ZK Sync, you know, they have their chains and they're thriving, but they're of course, you know, enabling other chains in the ecosystem, and so it just makes a lot of sense for, okay, what is next, right? Like that's always a question a lot of teams in crypto ask, and like, yeah, let's create our own sort of hub for this, and so it's, I would say it's just more of a case of it was the inverse, right? It was like, hey, let's just build our own chain. It works, and you know, people come to it. We enable other people to do, you know, to build these chains using the same stack, and then we could have this like this model like Cosmos, right? Whereas with Cosmos, it was, of course, they did it 180 degrees different, right? They said, hey, this is the model, and we're going to have this to be like, you know, the central hub and everything. And so maybe maybe like the answer lies in distribution and getting, you know, people to care about, you know, your ecosystem first and use cases there before, you know, making it into this model that everyone's converging to.
I think there are 3 or 4 very important technical caveats why you would want to have your own rollup for your own application. And these are like, first of all, it's congestion. Even on fast chains, you can't count, like you think of Solana, which is like the textbook example of a hyper-fast blockchain. When the meme coin craze was like with the Trump coin and everything in January, it got congested. And like theoretically, if you were doing something of your own at that moment, your services badly affected, right? But if the main chain gets congested, you just post the data a bit later, you know, to it. Of course, it does affect the security guarantees and profiles in a way, but like the experience that your users get remains basically the same. And then that's one thing. The other thing is you want a way to monetize transaction processing. Obviously, the blockchain ecosystem is still finding ways. What's the best way to like earn money on applications? One good way is like you run your own sequencer. You charge, you know, some price for transactions, and that's it. You pay for the security to Ethereum, and yeah. So basically, that's my take. Like I think it's gonna get even more extreme. I think it's gonna go into the direction where people are gonna create chains for one-time usages only. I always had this idea like a music festival. You know, they have to get all the tickets, the paying for the drinks inside and everything. Why not spin a rollup for like 2 weeks, do all these things, and then turn it off? Right? Everyone can pull their money back to a core chain because it works through crypto proofs, but you just spent like $1,000, you know, for the entire infrastructure around it, and nobody cares that the transaction of you buying like Coca-Cola at music festival has to be recorded forever on an immutable ledger, you know. So I think that's the sort of vision that I have. Like not all cases are the same, and customizability is important.
No, I do like that. I like the idea of like micro rollups that just pop up for a specific use case, and then like nobody cares about the long-term development. Like use crypto for what it's meant to be used for, and then like everybody wins at the end of it, sort of.
Yeah.
Now,
And think of this micro rollup, just sorry, because I have, like, this is for me a very interesting topic, but think of this micro rollup as like being shipped with the entire stack, right? So not only does it ship, imagine a startup that's doing like this music festival app powered by blockchain. And if you're a user, if you're a music festival, you just click create, like you create now a server on DigitalOcean, spins up a rollup, spins up an instance of Biconomy network, spins up an instance of like a messaging layer, a bridging layer for like tokens, with mint and burn models or whatever. It just works for you as a user. You don't even know that you spun up a rollup. You're not even aware of this fact in the background. You just know that there's some infra costs, and suddenly your users get full access to like paying with credit cards, on ramps, off ramps, processing, offline payments, everything, and it just like works out of the box without you having to set up all this financial infrastructure for having payments enabled because festivals usually you don't pay with money, you pay with their like tokens, that they have in the festival. So like for me, this is like an amazing case where blockchain actually makes the infrastructure much simpler. It really clearly answers the question, why should I use blockchain here? Because if you do it without blockchain, the technical overhead becomes heavier. Unless like if you use this ephemeral rollup, then it's like super easy and like really fits the narrative quite nicely.
I think like we found another adjective to describe Mislav after this, like a music festival expert.
Yes.
Yes.
Which music festival did you go to previously? Like, what was the last one?
Last one was it's been a while. I used to go all the time. I think it was everything was an Exit Festival in Belgrade. It was like nice. Electronic music stuff. Yeah.
I mean, the question I was asking was actually related, right? So the use case that you just mentioned is super interesting, right? Like, and it goes beyond the usual crypto bubble. So how do we go out and market this use case and get new developers in that are thinking in this sort of like wavelength, right? Because I feel like there's such a big opportunity there, but then it's so hard to market it. Like, how do you go tell people about this idea and how they can execute it on crypto rails enabled by Biconomy, enabled by all of these interop protocols that are there?
So one of the things is the programming language. That's a huge barrier of entry for people. Like people know JavaScript, people know TypeScript, people know like Python, people know all of these languages. Most people don't know Solidity, and I feel that this has been sort of, and most people don't know Rust if you even want to go to like the Solana ecosystem and everything. This has been sort of a hidden truth that most developers are aware of, and it was one of the main motivations behind Biconomy Network is that you should be able to build a blockchain application without writing a line of Solidity. Like, and I'm not talking like just some trivial, front-end integration, like a full-on proper app that does everything you need. You should be able to do it. You should be able to settle it on EVM, but it shouldn't even compile to EVM. It just has this orchestration layer. And why am I saying this? Is that's the prerequisite of getting mainstream developers into developing for blockchain is actually working with tooling that they understand. So interesting thing, I had this like whiteboarding session with a client who is like going to use the Biconomy network and the modular execution environment. And their idea is they're a TradFi oriented client. And the guy from the bank, he told me like this model fits perfectly with the mental model of the bankers that they're used to. What they're doing is they're running scripts, right? They're not used to writing smart contracts. They don't know how to reason about them. They don't know how to explore security problems, but scripts, they know what a script is, And if you allow them, like this is what I'm bullish about with Biconomy Network, if you allow developers very powerful scripting on top of blockchains, that's where you unlock a lot of the developer experience that's been lacking in the blockchain space.
That's super powerful. And then from like a go-to-market perspective, how do you approach like clients from outside the regular crypto, HubSpot BD list?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, this is one of those situations where it's better to just focus on like the crypto side, just because that's where you'll get more usage. However, having said that, it's about like I would say it's more exploring with the network that we have with let's say fintechs or banks or enterprise that that want to do something, right? And like I mean, it's not really a go-to-market. It's more the case of like actual like just exploration to see, hey, what do these guys really want to do? How do they want to do it? How serious are they? Because that's kind of what leads to getting some like either serious integrations or like an actual working app like the one Mislav just described. And so that's what we do with JP Morgan, for example. I mean, although they were POCs, but because they knew what they wanted to do, it just made the whole process easier, right? The problem is that most let's say Web2 apps or enterprises don't know what they want to do. Right? And so that kind of limits, because the market is huge, but the addressable market for like what of knowing what they want to do is still pretty small, to be honest.
Yeah. So one of the areas we've been seeing this in is these stablecoin payment apps that are sort of popping up quite a lot. So one thing I've noticed about them is a lot of them didn't write a single smart contract. Like they just integrate USDC, they integrate bridges, aggregators, providers, they move it into Aave, etc. And so these are fully fledged applications that the developers built without writing smart contracts. So this is one of the validations of this thesis that we have in like the immediate ecosystem. I wouldn't say this is going beyond Web3 HubSpot BD list, but it's sort of like dipping your toes outside. Like they will be targeting like people who are not familiar with Web3. And then those can serve as kickoff points for other developers to get interested. And again, my thesis is if the tooling is good enough, at that point it becomes the developer won't drop off. Like at this point, I think if a Web2 developer comes, unless they're super interested in Web3, they'll just drop off because they don't understand the tooling, they don't understand the concept, the mental model, etc.
I mean, it makes sense because like so many times, even when I'm talking with my, let's say, AI friends, right? And I'm like, can you build this app? They're like, give me two weeks to familiarize myself with this language and like all of these new tooling. So I feel like even if the intent is there, they cannot just get started, like get their hands dirty. So this kind of solves that problem, and I think that's super powerful.
I mean, at the end of the day, our entire stack can be accessed through an API or pure JavaScript SDKs, and like nothing prevents us if we see the demand of building like a Python SDK, and these SDKs are extremely expressive. They are in a sense not SDKs how you would traditionally look at them. They are all pseudo programming languages. Basically you can express, hey, do this. If this happens, then do this. And package all of that up into a super transaction. All of those instructions, conditionals, looping, everything's part of the same super transaction. And then you just send it off to the Biconomy network, and the network starts orchestrating your script. Basically, that's, I think, like the closest mental model is scripting. Like that's how you script over how you build scripts, on traditional software. This is how you build scripts for blockchains.
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of like applications and users, there's a saying that you have to go meet the users where they are. So this kind of goes out and meets the developers where they are, right? Like it's super nice. So just to like wrap it up, this Biconomy network is already live. It's on mainnet. What would you like to emphasize about it? What would you like to send out as a message that people can get started building with it?
Well, on a technical side, I can say that we've taken a lot of precautions to make sure that it's I don't like to use the word aligned, but let's call it Ethereum aligned. It's a truly decentralized network. There is nothing that our nodes can do that you haven't explicitly signed. Every piece of instruction is validated 100% on chain by a smart contract that's been extensively audited. I think, Ahmed, we're now going on about 6 auditors on the same contract, 6 auditing firms, not even more auditing people. So like with an extensively audited smart contract, the infrastructure is being run by professional node operators who are like geographically distributed. We have built-in very high redundancies with these things called collaborative execution, where collaborative execution is coming a bit later, but we have this plan of making sure that it's scalable to hundreds and hundreds, let's say 1,000 chains, to one URL. So these are primary things that I would like to emphasize on the network.
Yeah, I would also want to emphasize, I just say one or two things, and firstly is just to like recap what we mentioned earlier is one-click Ethereum. So to mention that. The second thing is of course people know us, because of account abstraction and everything. But if it wasn't for account abstraction, like we wouldn't have been able to get to this point. And the reason why I say this is because we were one of the first companies to work with account abstraction and to distribute it and to really like educate the ecosystem about it. And we've seen all the benefits, we've seen all the challenges. And what we're essentially like doing with the Biconomy network is that it really actually brings everything, all the learnings that we've done with account abstraction. It brings essentially all the features and all the benefits that it has, whilst also removing the challenges and the bottlenecks that we've seen, as well as introducing all the new functionalities that we just sort of discussed, earlier on this podcast. And so for us, I would say account abstraction, unfortunately, has been I would say is limiting. I'd say it's now yesterday's technology, right? With what we're doing is naturally going to be the next step for account abstraction. Like people realize this. If they haven't realized this today, they realize it tomorrow. And so we're again being like the first to sort of come to market with this. We're not, I would say, doing account abstraction, more. I mean, it's enabled. It's a feature. It's like chain abstraction, right? It's a feature. It's there. And so we are seeing some developers just wanting like benefits, and it's like, yeah, use the network, but don't use our centralized infrastructure that we have built for the past few years. Like, don't do that. Use the network. And so I think this is probably going to be a new mental model for people to understand, right? Because they're like, oh, wait a minute, like, how is it going to work and everything. So just want to emphasize this point.
Makes sense. I think like this was super insightful because I got to know your thoughts about the ecosystem in general. Like, of course, you told us about the Biconomy network, how it fits in, and all of it sounds great. And hopefully, like, people can get behind it. We see more and more adoption. So it'll be interesting to see where we are 6 months from now, like 12 months from now. But in general, it was super nice to like get your thoughts on all the things that are happening in the ecosystem and all the different moving parts. So thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you as well. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we do a third time as well sometime.
Of course.
Yeah.